Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. Welcome to Anatomy of a Death Record, Death Registration Through the Years, presented by yours truly, Elizabeth Ferris Boone with Mobile Public Library, Local History and Genealogy. Okay, so death records. On your right, this is an example of an Alabama death certificate from 1973. And according to Dr. Lawrence K. Altman, MD, filling out the death record is one of a doctor's most important final acts in caring for a patient, even though the patient is no longer around to appreciate it. And they're used for so many different things, the settling of life insurance and estate settlements, important information for survivors and genealogists, advancing knowledge about diseases, accidents, and other matters of public health, and even things that are more banal, like canceling a Netflix subscription for someone who's passed away. So going way, way back, the Articles of Eyre in 1194 England are considered the origin of death investigation in the modern sense, using a coroner to try to figure out what exactly killed you. The articles provided for the election of 3 knights and 1 clerk in each county, and they were keepers of the pleas of the crown, or custos placitorum coronae, forgive my pronunciation perhaps. And they were protectors of the crown's financial assets at a local level, mostly because the sheriffs were thought to be corrupt and keeping the money when someone passed. So the crown wanted to make sure that they got their cut. And they were also known as crowners, and it's thought to be the origin for the word coroner. Going forward a little bit, the earliest record, they're bills of mortality, and they popped up around early 16th century England. It's the predecessor for the modern death record, and they're thought to have popped up because of the Black Death that struck England in 1347. And they were not so much a wealth of information. They were just weekly lists of people who died of the plague. And they came out every now and then when an epidemic or when an outbreak popped up. And they have no information, not even the name of the individual, just how many people died. I think someone said this 1512 London Bill of Mortality is the oldest one that they still have a record of, and it just says that between 16th and 23rd November of 1512, 34 people died of the plague and 32 died of other diseases. And the reason for the bills of mortality, people thought that they were more to help healthy people avoid the more infectious parts of town. And eventually, when hopefully the plague would subside, it would restore public confidence, like, oh, not so many people are dying of it now. Some improvements. In 1603, they started coming out once a week rather than only at the height of the deaths. And then in 1629, when there was a slowdown in plague deaths, the court of King James I ordered parish clerks to start recording other causes of death. And this is the world's first state-mandated system for recording why we die. On the right, this is a 1665 Bill of Mortality for London. And there is a link here that should work if you're interested. It's old disease names, but you can see some of these we know, like cancer, colic, consumption. But King's Evil, during that week, 10 people died of that. And let's see. King's Evil was tuberculosis of the neck and lymph glands. So you can use this website to kind of interpret these old causes of death that we don't use, words we don't use anymore. Right, so all the way in 1836, the bills of mortality got replaced in England with an actual death registration system. It was managed by the General Register Office, which is currently part of Her Majesty's Passport Office, and it oversees all civil registration in England and Wales. And it also maintains the archives for births, marriages, and deaths for England and Wales going back to 1837. And this link is just, if you have ancestors that go back that way, this is where you could order their records. Okay, this is July 11th of 1822, the Mobile Commercial Register. They published a bill of mortality for the week that ended Wednesday night. And as you can see, it's not a whole lot of information, but it will give you the person's place of birth and how old they were when they died. But it's also very likely not a complete list of all the people that died that week. This is from September 11th of 1858 in the Mobile Daily Register. And it was the editors kind of bragging about how Mobile is so far untouched by the plague, or I'm sorry, yellow fever. So they were saying, we take great pleasure in stating that thus far we have had nothing like epidemic among us, and that the weekly bill of mortality continues to show our general health is still unaffected by any prevailing disorder. And much like we do today, we're still battling with New Orleans, apparently. They're saying we wonder that we've been so largely exempted from it since we are so near to New Orleans. And apparently people were very sick over there. But that year was actually considered an epidemic for yellow fever in Mobile. The first death was August 3rd, which was about a month and a half before this article, and 70 people ended up dying that year of yellow fever. Some important changes in the American colonies where the settlers came and they were using the system they were accustomed to from England for registration. In 1632, the Grand General Assembly of Virginia passed a law that required a minister or warden from each parish to come once a year to present their register of christenings, marriages, and burials for the year. And the important thing about that is you'll notice that it's specifically church ceremonies that they were recording. In 1639, the Massachusetts Bay Colony General Court passed a law that required the courts to record all of their judgments and all births, marriages, and deaths. And this is important because it transferred the registration responsibility from the church to the government officers, and it recorded vital events rather than church ceremonies. Pardon. So from registration to statistics, we're going back across the sea to England. This is John Grant, London haberdasher, and he is considered the father of demography. Demography is the statistical study of the size, structure, and development of human populations, and he believed that general truths about the population could be derived from vital statistics. So in 1662, he published this, what you can see on the right. This is his publication. He used the bills of mortality that the London parishes had been collecting since 1532, and he created a list of 81 causes of death broken into 4 categories: chronic diseases, epidemic diseases, conditions killing children, and outward griefs, which are just injuries. And he was followed by, well, a bit later, over 100 years later, William Farr, who was a British physician and epidemiologist. And he asked the question, it becomes necessary to discuss the problem, can lifetime be prolonged by a knowledge of the causes that cut it short? And he, if you'll remember, the General Register Office that England used to replace the bills of mortality with, when they opened that office in 1837, they invited William Farr to be the compiler of abstracts. And in 1853, he composed his own list for causes of death for the purpose of standardizing mortality data worldwide. And his list had 139 causes broken into 7 categories. And a little bit later in Massachusetts, this is Lemuel Shattuck, an interesting name. And in 1850, he published the report of the Sanitary Commission of Massachusetts, which is considered by, Charles Edward Amory Winslow was another physician and expert on public health. And he called this document one of the most remarkable documents, perhaps the most significant single document in the history of public health. And this document recommended the creation of a state board of health based on the complete registration of vital statistics. And another reason that this man is so important to anyone who loves genealogy is that he was recruited to help with the 1850 census, and he was the person who suggested using the primary census unit as the individual rather than the family. So each person in a household would get their own line with their own name and their own occupation. Here's an example of the 1840 census. For example, here's John Chastain, and all we know about him from this is that his family were free colored persons. There were 2 males under 10, 1 male between 36 and 55 or 56, 2 females under 10, and then 1 female between 10 and 24. So 10 years later, under Lemuel Shattuck's direction, the 1850 census, this is the same family, but as you can see, each person is named with their age, their sex, their race. This is M, it's for mulatto. Occupation is farmer. It's saying their birthplace for all of them was Alabama. So it's still not a complete wealth of information, but it's much more than we would have if they hadn't moved over to his suggestions. Another thing that he developed were the mortality schedules, although from what I read, it was against his better judgment. He did not believe that this was useful or helpful for public health, but he deferred to the census officers. So the censuses started including the questions: born within the year, married within the year, and the disease if they died within the year. This is an example of the City of Mobile 1850 mortality schedule. And it does give pretty useful information: name, age, sex, race, marital status, birthplace, month of death, cause of death, and so on and so forth. These are mostly from 1850 to 1880. The 6 states you see listed there do have one for 1885. You can access mortality schedules for 1850 on familysearch.org. It's a free genealogical database, and Ancestry.com has almost all of them from 1850 to 1885, though there are some gaps for certain states for certain years. So we look at the mortality schedules today, and for genealogists, they do offer a lot of information, but the report for the census of 1854 lamented that the mortality schedules could be said to have but very little value, and nothing short of an actual registration system could give the required data satisfactorily. Experience has shown that people will not or cannot remember and report to the census taker the number of the facts. Well, and that's not so hard to understand since it's a whole year and probably people had a lot of things going on. But so the Census Bureau and the death certificate. The census was something that was provided for within the Constitution, so it's at a federal level, and that's why it's so much more organized, and it's been around so much longer than an actual standardized death registration system. Vital statistics themselves developed more at a local level and then as a state function. But by January 1st of 1900, the Census Office recommended a standard death certificate for everybody across the board. It didn't happen as easily as that. 12 states adopted it in full by the deadline, and then 2 states and the District of Columbia adopted it in part, and 71 major cities and other states adopted it in full or with revisions. So in 1903, Congress tried to help out by they passed a resolution asking state authorities to cooperate with the Census Bureau and implement a uniform death and birth registration system. And skipping forward a little bit to 1938, the National Resources Planning Board said the long, hard, often discouraging campaign, which was fought to bring states one by one into the fold, constitutes one of the proudest chapters in the history of the Bureau of the Census. This is table 2 showing changes in death certificates over time. So there have been many changes throughout the years. Some of the more significant ones include in 1918, they started being more specific about residency, like the actual city or town where you were living rather than just the state or the county. The name of the husband or wife also came about in 1918. If you were a veteran and what your social security number was in 1939. Well, sorry, the first one that I mentioned was place of birth, but the residency information also did more come out in 1918. And whether the cause of death was accident, suicide, or homicide started being paid attention to in 1910. Whether or not an autopsy was performed, that came about in 1918. More information about the type of injury and the nature of the injury, was disease or injury related to occupation, came out in 1930. And then a really big important one came out in 1939. And you can see here all of these extra marks for cause of death, what the immediate cause of death, what caused that, and then what caused the thing that caused the immediate cause of death, and so on and so forth. This is the most current revision of the death certificate, I believe November of 2003. And this information here, the decedent's legal name, their sex, social security number, birthplace, this is usually given by an informant, which is hopefully a family member who actually knows the information, because it is such good information for anyone researching their ancestry, like their father's name, the mother's name, and the maiden name. So it's a source of inaccuracy also if the informant didn't know or just took a guess about something. This part is a little bit new, well, newer as far as I know, but did tobacco use contribute to the death? And if the decedent was female, was she pregnant within the past year, pregnant at time of death, or pregnant within 42 days of death? And all of this down here about the decedent's education, whether they were of Hispanic origin, and what their race was. According to the instructions on the back of this is just for statistical purposes, and it's not included on the final certified copy. Okay, so the main thing that's caused a lot of complications over the years is the increased information that they're seeking for causes of death. You have 4 lines here: the immediate cause, what caused that, what caused that, and finally, what caused that. So for example, the immediate cause of death being aspiration pneumonia as a consequence of coma complications, which came about because of blunt force injuries, and that happened because of motor vehicle accident. And this 4th line is what gets turned into an ICD code, and that's what gets put as, this is what killed you, this is why you died. So when you thought the history lesson was over, speaking of ICD codes, this is Jacques Bertillon. He was a French statistician and demographer, and he was the head of Paris Bureau of Vital Statistics in 1883. He expanded upon William Farr's work, and in 1893, he came out with the International List of Causes of Death, or ICD for short. his list had 161 causes of death broken into 14 categories and organized by anatomical systems, which is how we do it today. And his list was formally adopted by the American Public Health Association in 1898. So the ICD has been revised many times. At the time I was compiling this, the ICD-10 was the current one. It's managed by the World Health Organization. And one source said that ICD-11 was going to go into effect January 1st of 2022. But another source said that it is already in effect as of October 1st of this year. But today it's known as the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems. As you can tell from that title, it includes non-fatal diseases now. And the reason for that is because after World War II, hospitals and insurance companies prevailed upon WHO, the World Health Organization, to allow their list to be used for billing purposes, which doesn't please many epidemiologists because now public health priorities are no longer driving the management of the list. And it includes every imaginable healthcare interaction. There is a website called The Rheumatologist, and they wrote an ode to code to express their frustration with all of the categories and the complicated codes. For example, I like limericks, so this is a limerick. I didn't write it, but I approve. When the code that you need is not clear, just keep this poem quite near. If you're struck by a parrot, just grin and bear it. ICD-10 has you covered, my dear. And W61.02XA is a billable specific ICD-10 code that can be used to indicate a diagnosis for reimbursement purposes. And it is specifically for when you are struck by a parrot, but only for the initial encounter. And the next one will probably, well, I'm sure it resonates with all of us, but for me specifically, working on this presentation this past week. So how did we get in this mess? Is there no way it can be addressed? It takes too much time. Call it F439, an unspecified reaction to stress. So going back to the standard death certificate, it is a one-page document with instructions that span over several handouts and supplements, and it equals to 250 pages of instructions. And here's a good quote from former CDC Director Thomas Frieden: "The quality of the data you collect is inversely proportional to the amount of data you collect from each reporter." There's a typo, I hate that. Anyway, so the point is, the more questions you ask, the less accurate your data is going to be. In 2010, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center and Columbia University did a study on 521 doctors in residency programs across New York City. Out of those doctors, only a third of them believed death records are accurate. Less than 3% reported having submitted a correction for a death certificate in light of new information. And over half of them reported having knowingly recorded an inaccurate cause of death. This is not necessarily anything new. Going back real quick to 1662 London and our haberdasher John Grant, he complained that syphilis was an underreported cause of death due to medical investigators being unable to recognize it after the mist of a cup of ale and the bribe of a 2-groat fee. So other causes that were deemed thought to be underreported, please excuse me, because they were morally damning or unmentionable in polite society include tuberculosis, breast cancer, alcoholism, AIDS, and suicide. And this is known as vanity death certificates, where they would fudge the cause of death to protect the reputations of the dead and the delicate sensibilities of the living. And it was such a common practice in New York in the 1930s that the city had to start creating a second confidential report of death that had the actual cause of death on it. And this is also known, this is a small digression, but this is called Bowdlerizing the death certificates. And Bowdlerizing is when you remove any material that might be considered offensive or off color. And the origin for that term is this guy, Thomas Bowdler, because in the early 19th century, he wrote the Family Shakespeare. And it was a version of Shakespeare that was supposed to be safe for the family because it was free of any sexual references and double entendres. So to wrap up a little bit, how you can access death certificates. They are kept by your state health departments from whenever that department started filing them, sometime after when the standard death certificate came out in 1900. The Alabama Department of Public Health started filing death certificates in 1908, and these are considered public record after 25 years. You can order it for a certified copy is $15, and they can also send you a certificate of failure to find. There's on their website, you can find ID requirements because you do have to show that you are a family or related in some way if you want to get it for something that's more current than 25 years. You can also check with the county health departments, which would have been gathering this information before it became mandated statewide. The Mobile County Health Department says that they have death certificates, or that death certificate recording in Mobile began in 1820. You can also go to your local public library and see what resources they might have. And speaking of that, your Mobile Public Library Local History and Genealogy Division has many records here to assist you. We have Mobile County death certificates from 1876 to 1908. Pardon. On the MPL Digital Archives, we uploaded all of the certificates for 1876 and 1908, but there's an index for any of the range between there. So all you have to do is call us or email us if you have someone for which you would like us to search. We are also an affiliate library with FamilySearch.org, and they have a collection, Alabama Deaths 1908 through 1974, and these are the actual death certificates. So you can, from home, you can access the index or summary for the record, but to see the actual document, you would need to be in the library, or you can call us and request it. One moment. Other death records that we have here are Sexton reports. The drawer containing the microfilm for these says that it goes from 1848 through 1985, but what you're going to get from that really varies. Here's some examples. This is November 23rd of 1848, and it just says John Carroll, age 26, in the US, died in City Hospital, and there's the name of the sexton, and he died of debility. So still good information, but it doesn't tell you a whole lot about the individual. This is a sexton report for May of 1856, and it has a lot of the information that you might have seen in the mortality bills of mortality originally. There's the name, sex, age, color, occupation, disease, what graveyard, the lot and the square, where they were born, the name of the physician or of 2 citizen witnesses, and then remarks, which it looks like they either mark you a pauper or maybe something about your parents, son of, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to try to read that right now. Here's another example, is the death record for John Baptiste Serra, perhaps. It might be S-E-R-A or maybe C-L-E-R-A, But the point is that you start to get more information the further you go. He was a 34-year-old male, a Creole, and his occupation was brick mason, and he died from pericarditis. He was born in Mobile, and he's to be buried in the Catholic yard. And this is a sexton report from 1963 for Sarah Ray. It's not a whole lot of information for her, just that she's a female, 72 years old, colored, to be buried in Oaklawn Cemetery by Hodges Funeral Home for $1. And then this one is from October 1st of 1969, and it's the reimbursement to Roche Brown Funeral Home by the city of Mobile for their burial of a pauper named Spencer West. And these are the list of sources, so you know I didn't just make it all up. And this is my cat Max. Sorry for the unprofessionalism, but it's a fun icebreaker, don't you think? Does anyone have any questions?
Let me just say something first before we break into questions. I failed to introduce you. This is Elizabeth Theris Boone, and she is the head librarian of the Mobile Public Library Local History and Genealogy Division. And we love her dearly, and we are very thankful for her presenting today. So amazing. Thank you. I learned a whole lot, and I've been doing genealogy for some time. Yeah, so any questions, anybody? Then I will start and say, the death certificates that you showed, the actual blank forms, they were specific to Alabama. How do they differ from other states? Do you know?
I do not know. I'm sorry. I had to narrow my focus once I started going and realized that I was not going to be able to get through it all in time.
And there was something else. Can you go back over I guess some of the rheumatologist ode to code?
Okay. Yeah, I have a link for that if anyone wants to see more. There's also a website. It's icd10data.com, and it's where you can try to look at the code, and also you can go back to like ICD-9, ICD-8, depending on what year your death certificate was released in.
Yeah, because I know I'm we normally have Zoom meetings, but this is a Zoom presentation, so it's a little bit different. The links that you have, they're not going to necessarily work when we upload this to YouTube to share. I don't know. I'm asking if you know, or if anybody else knows by chance.
I'm not sure, but this is just the poem that they wrote. There's something here like if you died from your water skis catching on fire, but just the initial encounter. Drowning or submersion due to falling or jumping from a crushed fishing boat, initial encounter. Struck by a turtle. Pedestrian on foot injured in collision with other pedestrian conveyance. So I guess it's just they're frustrated because there are so many different codes now, so many ways to not just die, but get injured. ICD10data.com.
Is there a reason why they decided to do all of those many?
Well, presumably it happened to somebody at some point, but also it's for now that it can be used for billing purposes and insurance claims and reimbursements. maybe things always get more complicated once you put money in there. But ICD10data.com, you can search for codes. If you find a code listed on a death certificate that you don't recognize, you can search for it up in the search bar. Can you still see my screen, by the way? Yes, okay, so it's simple ICD10data.com. You can browse if you're just curious, but mostly you can like search for actual causes of death in here, like put the code in and see what they say about it. Any other questions?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you show the slide with the list of sources that you use, please?
Oh, yes.
You just kind of whizzed by.
Well, I didn't expect people to read it right then and there, sir.
Well, there's one in every crowd, right?
It would be you, Chris.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hi, Elizabeth. I'm sorry I can't get my video to show, but I'm
Hi.
here, Leanne. My question is related, but not exactly death certificate. I have someone I'm looking for a death certificate for who died in Arkansas, was brought back here. There is no record of death either in Arkansas or Alabama. For another family member, I have records of transport that I can see on microfilm, but when I request the death certificate, the health department does not give those to me. Is there any way to track that for a transport of a deceased body into the county?
And you've said you've already tried with the county health department?
I have.
I've seen in the Mobile County death records that we have, I've seen where before the certificate, there'll be a small card for transportation. So it's surprising that it's not either in the original state where they died or with the county where they were transported. I'm not sure what to say for that because it sounds out of the ordinary. I suppose you could look for newspaper articles, obituaries, or an article about the death if it was something other than natural causes, maybe.
I have that. I guess my question wasn't formulated correctly. I believe it is probably with the county, but that when I ask for the death certificate, all they're giving me is no return of death certificate. You know, they can't find it. But they aren't giving me any supporting data. Is there any way I can ask for that in a more appropriate manner?
Yeah, I'm not sure because it depends on their policies.
Okay.
But usually if you don't have like the name and the certificate number, it makes it harder. I haven't gone to the Mobile County Health Department, but I've spoken with patrons that have said that if you just go with the name and the date, sometimes they have a harder time finding it,
Right.
especially if maybe it was transcribed and there's an alternate spelling. And I know it gets frustrated because you have to pay for it each time you ask them to search. I'm sorry, I don't know what
That's okay.
you would do.
Follow up on that though, that you might know, with the microfilmed records from the family history centers, is it possible that it would be there and I could come to the library or ask you guys to look it up and maybe find it that way?
Is it in Mobile?
Well, the death occurred in Arkansas, but
Arkansas.
yes, it's my great grandfather. He's buried in Magnolia Cemetery. He died in, I think, 1931.
Okay. There is on Family Search. One moment. It kind of ties in with the Alabama deaths from 1908 collection, but they have it, if you go to the catalog and search by location, Okay, for Mobile as a place and vital records, they do have Mobile County death records from 1876 through 1940. So that could be something you could request through us or come in to flip through. Some of these, like the later years, you can search via the index, but again, that also has to do with how it was transcribed in the computer system. Sometimes it's not ideal, but for example, you could just go to view the images and then flip through them and search according to date rather than whatever in the index is using. That way you can see the actual name yourself and see if you recognize your person. And it's
Awesome.
always worth a try.
Awesome, thank you. And I wasn't trying to stump you, I promise.
Anybody else? Stump the librarian?
Hi, Arena Allen here. I'd just like to make a comment. This was absolutely wonderful. I love this. I'm a medical reviewer. Actually, I'm retired now, but I worked for Blue Cross at one time, so I'm very familiar with ICD codes. And they do have many, many modifiers. And like you said, you have to do research. They want you to be as specific as possible as to every disease has numerous modifiers, and every cause, every injury, procedure, etc., has numerous modifiers. But that information's all used, like you said, for insurance billing. It's used for research. A lot of researchers go back and they compile their research based on these ICD-9 codes. And reimbursement by the government too. The government collects a lot of that information. So they do want them to be very specific. But just as a little anecdote, I worked with a doctor once who used the same diagnosis, myocardial infarction, which is the technical name for a heart attack, on every death certificate he signed. And so you don't always find what it is, but there's a hint. And I asked him once, I says, why do you use that? And he says, well, everyone's heart stops when they die. So I thought, okay.
I mean, I guess that's fair. But I guess any rare causes of death are going to stay rare if no one ever uses them.
No, but thank you. This has been very good. The other thing I did medical record review for attorneys. And everything in the medical record that they call the medical record the silent witness, because the medical record really ruled in litigation. So what is written in there, particularly, we looked at death certificates, etc., and how it's coded was very relevant in how health professionals document things. So that's my 2 cents. But thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. All right, we're going to give it a 5-second wait. And if no one has any questions, I'm going to count myself released. What do you think?
No, not yet. Did I miss it, or did you discuss visitation by God?
I did not discuss it, Tracy. I discussed many other things, though. Would you like to?
I just remember when I discovered those the documents in the coroner's inquest very early in the 1800s. I think it's the record sets 1814 to 1850 or something thereabouts, and I couldn't figure out what are they talking about. It took me a minute to realize they were talking about a natural death. And so, yeah, I just think that one's a fun one that we don't see anymore.
Yeah, so much fun we can find in researching death. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here this Saturday morning or evening, depending where you are. And It's been great. It's been fun. here's my cat Max again. And
Yeah, thank you, Lizzie. I appreciate
you.
it so very much. And let me just give a quick statement to those of you who subscribe to MCC HPS's Mumbo Gumbo. If you have not gotten your physical magazine, it is on the way. We're starting to pay someone to mail them. The other thing you should have, Elaine, did you get your digital copy in your email?
I received the digital.
Okay,
yes.
okay, all right. I'm just trying to make sure because I know some people it's going to their spam and they're not realizing that. So I'm really trying to address that each time. We are planning on having some micro reunions. I've still got to put those out. The first one will actually be this Wednesday for Bodan family. And then I think Lauren Dean and Gomez families beyond that. And next weekend will be Darren Glassbrook with the Mobile Medical Museum, and he's going to discuss pandemics in Mobile then all the way to now. So that ought to be really, really interesting. And I hope that you guys can come to that as well. And that's it, I guess. Lizzie, thank you so very much.
thank you for having me. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.